I am heavy bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
Okay, welcome back. This is another episode of Heavy Board Presents JerkShop, and this is Andrew Whitstadt. This email I got a few months ago, but I'd been delayed. I've been pretty busy going about everything that I have to do now, so I didn't get it to it yet, but I got a great email from a listener that's sharing a kind of literature workshop style story. And it's pretty long, but I'm going to read it to you here and we're going to go in and talk about it. It's just kind of incredible. And this is something from even a few years ago, several years ago. And it just kind of shows how pervasive a lot of this kind of cultural stuff is. But here we are. We're going to do it. All right. And again, I'm going to keep it anonymous. And I guess a reminder real quick to everybody. Yeah, we're still looking for workshop stories. If you or someone you know has a workshop story or any type of like kind of literary culture story, usually if they're like funny or ridiculous, please send them in, heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. We love getting them on Heavy Board here. Of course I say we, but it's just me. So I love getting them and putting them out here. And of course I keep it all anonymous and so nobody gets blown up or anything like that. And I guess I'll do some more housekeeping. Yeah. Please support this podcast. We are in a growth stage right now on the podcast, and it looks like that's going to continue. It's picking up to a point where I'm like, oh, wow, it's really picking up. I mean, I have a lot of guests coming up. I'm booked up through March, essentially, of this year. And I mean, that's good news, but it does take a lot of work for me, a lot of prep, a lot of stuff that has to go on. So please, if you like this podcast, please support it. You can go to patreon.com/heavyboard, become a member for $5 a month, and you get access to the entire back catalog, every episode, every bonus episode, every JerkShop episode like this. You can also do that at andrewwhitstadt.substack.com, which I've been using, launched recently, but I've been using the Substack website as kind of like my website for writing. So you have access to the podcast, you have access to my writing. I'll put up articles, movie reviews, things like that. And of course, a lot of those movie reviews will end up being Heavy Movies episodes too. But if you like the written form, it's up there. And I'm determined to keep that going. So you can join there as well. You get the same stuff. And then, of course, if you don't want to do that, you can't afford it, there are other ways to support this podcast. You can support us by leaving a review on Apple or Spotify. Give us 5 stars. It really helps out the podcast, helps us grow. You can also buy any of the books through the links below these episodes, or just click those links. That's a free way to support us. It helps support the podcast. You can also just subscribe. Just subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on any podcast platform, follow us on social media. Like, all of that is free ways to support us. It really helps the podcast out, and it doesn't require anything from you guys, no monetary commitments, anything like that. So please, if you like this podcast, please support it. This is a listener-supported podcast. We do not have ads or advertisers. It is just me running the show here. So, all right, let's get into this. And again, this is a kind of a long story here, but I think the good long stories like this are good. And again, if you have a story like this, send it to heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. Let's get a sip of coffee here. Okay, and this is from a beloved listener who's been listening for a while. And I really appreciate we've sent emails back and forth. Again, for a lot of you out there listening, if you say, oh man, I like this project, I want to get involved, send me an email. A lot of times if you send me an email, I will just ask if you want to come on the podcast. I will just be like, oh yeah, cool. Do you want to come on? To talk about something you like, fiction, poetry, nonfiction, something cultural you want to talk about. If you have your own books to promote, anything like that, please just feel free to reach out to me. I'm at that stage now where I'm getting a lot of emails from, like PR firms and stuff asking me to have their clients on, and I'm fine with that. I have recently reached a point where I've been burned by a few of these, setting up, interviews for clients that I've been contacted with from, press agents, book publicists. So for me, I am being a little bit more careful in terms of who I have on the podcast, because a lot of these people that are, I guess, writers are just flaky. They don't care. I don't like being stood up. I don't like my time wasted. I'm very kind of strict about my time. I have a lot going on. I have my 40-hour-a-week day job. I have a young family. I have this podcast. I have my own writing and reading that I need to take care of. And, I just don't have time to waste on things like that. And, I'm sorry. No, I don't reschedule with people that stand me up. No email, no call, nothing. No, I don't reschedule with that. But still, I've been getting emails like that. And I've actually been getting so many to the point where I'm like, whoa, like need to really kind of hunker down. So that's happening. But again, I love to squeeze in. Right, I'm thinking, I'm getting so many emails from PR, publicists and stuff like that, trying to get their client booked on the show, that I'm thinking that maybe towards the end of this year, I might be able to start doing this once a week. I'll have enough content to do kind of core episodes once a week here. But, we'll see. We'll see. I'm still going to keep doing the bi-weekly format for all you listeners out there. I like the format. It's good. It's a good pace for me to keep up with it. And then doing kind of bonus stuff in between so that you guys get something every week from the show. But yeah, please feel free to participate in the show if you like it. Please reach out to me. Again, it's kind of crazy how many guests I've had on here just because they've reached out to me via email. And they're like, hey, I love the show, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm just like, yeah, that's great. You want to come on? You want to come on and talk some books? We're still at a place we're not so big that we can avoid that. We can have listeners that are enthusiastic come on and promote their stuff and talk books and poetry and literary culture and movies, whatever you want to talk about. We can come on here. So yeah, I'm open to that. Just send me an email, heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. And like I said, I'm booked up through March, man. So we got a lot going on here for Heavy Board in the future. But all right, let's get to this thing that we came here for, the JerkShop episode. All right. So this is from a listener who reached out to me, and we talked back and forth about some poetry, and we had a lot of fun. And they decided to send me this story about something that happened to them. And I'm going to read it to you guys here, again, keeping it anonymous, and kind of go into it and talk about what we have here. Which is, again, the same thing we always have here, which is the literary culture has been completely corrupted by a political culture, and people keep gaslighting me that that's not the case. They keep saying, "Oh, that's not what's happening. That's not what's happening." While there are meetings in every single publishing house right now talking about the politics of the day and how we have to publish around the current politics of the day. Again, if anybody's working and publishing that has stories like this, please reach out to me, heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to connect with you. Even if you don't want to come on or you want to remain anonymous, that's fine. I'm not some journalist that's, I have to prove where it came from. No, this isn't that type of podcast. So, but all right, let's get into this story. So, listener writes in. The following took place against the backdrop of the UK's poetry wars, which reverberated throughout the 1970s and 1980s. And poetry wars, that's interesting, right? Kind of like, look, like everybody knows what this listener is talking about. There was a canon war going on, and this is kind of Harold Bloom's big critique. There is a canon war, and again, it is explicitly political. When people are talking about the literary canon and criticizing it, they're criticizing it from a political argument. And anybody that says otherwise is gaslighting. They're lying. They're not being honest. And I really am just not going to tolerate anybody saying that to me any longer, that it isn't this explicitly political project about how many black people are published in the canon or how many white men, whatever it is. Again, when you're talking about that, you're talking about government census categories. You're talking about a politics that is forced over top of timeless works of art. And again, it also comes from this idea of like that it's a bad thing to do, to say that some works of art are better than others. Again, having this judgment, we talk about this all the time on the podcast. Many of you regular listeners will know that is absolute bullshit. It is absolute bullshit. Absolutely. There are some works of art that are better than others, and that is the entire purpose of a canon, is to differentiate good works of art from mediocre or bad works of art. It isn't a political census project. And anyone telling you that it is or should be is not talking about literature. They're talking about politics, wokeness, etc. So that's what they mean by the UK's poetry wars. So here we go. The dispute arose when a radical cadre of poets dedicated to non-traditional and experimental poetic forms and a loosening from the structures and ties of modernism took over the UK's Poetry Society. This sounds a lot like the Poetry Foundation being taken over by woke radicals, doesn't it? Again, this has been happening for the last 40 years. We have not been able to do anything in literature. We haven't been able to discover anything or do anything new or interesting in literature for probably about 50 years or more in the UK, in America, in all of Western society, because of these types of radicals taking over the cultural institutions. And again, I'm not going to be gaslit about that any longer. So if you want to be like, no, that's not true, you're a liar, okay? You're not being honest. So that's what I have to say about that. Listener goes on, as radicals, they were themselves expunged after a brief period of control. That sounds very much like the woke takeover of Poetry Foundation, which publishes garbage, by the way, right? Like everybody out there, if you listen to this, you probably know. Poetry Foundation publishes garbage. Their editors are awful. They have no taste. They have no judgment. They have no vision apart from a political one that they get from scrolling social media. I want to be very clear about that. It is a political vision being disguised as an artistic vision, or claim that they're one and the same. They are not. Politics come and go. Great art stands the test of time, okay? For all those doubters out there. Okay, what underlaid the turmoil was a general restructuring taking place, focused on this national organization, mirrored and outdated procedures, unwarranted influence, and a perceived gender imbalance. Oh, there it is. The gender imbalance. How many white men do we have running the institution? Again, and people will gaslight me on this, you're lying. I know for a fact there are editorial meetings at every major publication that ask this question: how many white men are we publishing? That's the question they ask, and it isn't an artistic question. It's a political question. It is a particular set of politics that motivates that question to be asked, and then the actions taken from asking that question, okay? So again, I will not be gaslit about this not happening or not being a thing any longer, okay? Everybody knows it. Everybody who works in the industry knows it. Agents, publishers, editors, they all know it. So I don't want to hear it. Due to an appalling start in life with an education turned sour, I was utterly unaware of the need as a writer to position oneself in the fallout from this affair. I knew nothing of the extent to which poetry had become politicized, nor of the viciousness with which various factional infighting had been carried on. As I was soon to discover firsthand, the poetry wars ushered into the UK poetry scene a polemical imprinting that continues to this day. And of course, all of you regular listeners know this. Of course it has. Again, there's this kind of 60s radicalism that really destroyed a lot of art institutions, and people weren't being honest about that. They're still not being honest about it. It really kind of changed the, mission statements for a lot of these institutions. Okay, listener goes on. The residential course I selected was one of the most high-profile available and cost something in the region of £200 to £300, which was a lot of money to find at the time. This was about 3 years or so after starting to write poetry in a final year of university, having grown disenchanted with my selected course of study. Instances or episodes drawn from my true life were unbearably painful, so earliest attempts tended towards the inexpert and undercooked. Not long afterwards, they erupted into hyperbolic, proto-adult word salads as I sought to revenge myself upon multiple failures in what I thought of as having been a resplendent humanistic inquiry. By the time of the workshop, this massed approach had become full-blown totemic, by which I mean poems based on privileging words into charged, almost auto-generated landscapes. Unsure of what to trust, compounded by what to write about, I wanted to examine the way language defended itself, given a strained context. Did words react the way I expected, or did they have a power of recuperation and adjustment? Did they just yield nothing, only sit around unperturbed with autonomous meaning, more or less unruffled? And this is a good point, right? I think there's a lot of confusion about the power of words and what they do. I think and again, this stems from the political obsessions that we're living through, and they're not going away. People say, oh, we're going away. No, it isn't. It's still full blown. These meetings are still happening at every publishing house. But there's this obsession with kind of the political power of words. And it's always a lot of confusion around that because words do have power. There is power in words, and I understand what they're saying when they say words are powerful. But at the same time, they can only do so much, right? And words are created through all these different contexts, through the cultural context, through the kind of language used by the culture and the people speaking that language, writing in that language. Words are created, they're discarded, they're invented. They're not just there. They don't just sit around unperturbed, right? Like this listener was saying, writing in. And as they're explaining here that the listener was explaining that, as they were doing this, as a student studying poetry, they were fascinated by this concept, of words and stuff. So it makes sense, right? This is a curious mind going in and trying to unpack some of these ideas. And I think, that's right. You should be thinking that when you're starting to write and you've been writing for a few years. If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right. Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, JerkShop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard. And you kind of discover this stuff, so I understand that. The listener goes on. Sorry, let me get a coffee sip here real quick. As I plowed ahead, signing up for a week's residential course in the deep countryside of the Southwest, writing poetry with 2 of the UK's leading poets as tutors, I had no idea as to the levels of irrelevance such an esoteric approach, as I had conjured, would be regarded. Worse, I was lingering over the possibility poetry could be on a pedestal in offering a different sociability, a milieu in which I stood a chance of receiving a kind of welcome, or just to be kind. And this is true too, right? This is the thing nobody's honest about. Even big writers are like, oh, I was just writing to write. No, you wanted to get some type of recognition. There was a culture around this, and it was very accepting, and you could be a part of this culture by writing and being a part, and just by writing something, you were a part of the culture. And I appreciate that. I think that's what a lot of people get in to writing and art around, is that there's this culture here. It's very accepting and anything goes. All you have to do to participate in it is just start writing and try, right? And this is true for a lot of different art forms. So, not just poetry and fiction. Okay. The listener goes on, what happened next is almost beyond belief. Firstly, I chose to cycle to the course so that I could cycle. Sorry, the listeners, I guess this is UK speak, cycle to ride a bike, right? To cycle to the course so that I could take in the spectacular summer countryside of the West Country, but also, I think, as a symbolic gesture in the manner of D.H. Lawrence, whose poetry I loved at the time. Like many symbolic actions, it was completely unnoticed, but that was okay. Of course, just ride a bike. After a couple of hours pedaling, I came to the driveway at the crest of a valley and looked down on the Arvon Foundations. Okay, this is a word I don't know. Totally Barton? Nestling below, looking incestuously perfect and immune to exterior conflicts. All right, Brits, help me out with this. What is this? Arvon Foundations, Totley Barton? Totally Barton? I docked. So, we'll see. I docked, registered, and joined the other attendees in a large communal kitchen where a group supper was being prepared. And as you guys know, if you've been to writing retreats and things like that, or workshops where you have to apply and go into kind of like a winter cabin or whatever, these are all over the place. This is very common, right? Kind of community meals in a communal kitchen, and you kind of get like a cabin or a bunk, and it's nice. You get kind of a few weeks to just work on writing and be around other writers and artists, and it's usually, I usually hear mixed things from that. Some people love it, some people don't, but you get the gist. This is all normal. This is how it works, right? Listener goes on. There seemed a preponderance of middle-aged women and a scattering of writers more my own age. In general, the atmosphere was guarded. After supper, we assembled for readings of our own poems in the library with only one of the tutors, Roger McGough. The other tutor, Carol Ann Duffy, was arriving the next day. As my turn came around, I read out a poem rather unconvincingly, and the reaction of Roger McGough was that he wished he had written a certain musical recurrence contained in the text. So far, so good, I thought, hardly realizing this was a common workshop trope when you don't know how to respond but want to avoid the critical, much the same as someone will say they like the colors of a painting when they are doubtful over whether they like it at all. That's very true, right? Like that's... this is why we have these kind of episodes, is because there is this kind of, tropes people go into when they don't know what to say about something. Because the workshop does set it up as like, oh, you have to say something. It's set up for that. So whenever somebody doesn't know what to say or they don't know how to approach something, they say bullshit. And it's kind of like, oh, wow, great. Yeah, thanks. But anyway, yeah, a lot of you know that. Of course, McGough could have genuinely liked the poem. McGough? Is that how you say this? Roger McGough? McGough could have genuinely liked the poem. I never really discovered that one way or the other. I also made tentative friends with one of the attendees my own age who was uncertain about her poetry direction, and she shared some of her writing. The next morning, lists were pinned up to assign attendees their tutors. My name was assigned to Carol Ann Duffy, but with no writing schedule or timetable next to my name, unlike all the other attendees. None of the course administrators were around, so I genuinely didn't know if this was a mistake or that somehow and for some reason I had been dropped. My assigned tutor was locked into the pre-booked sessions, and from that moment on, I never saw either tutor during the day. The weather continued warm and sunny, so I took to taking walks by myself along the river, and as the 5 days of the course spooled away, I eventually gave up appearing at group meals. I tried a few times to socialize, but opted in the end for eked-out packed lunches as I grew more and more isolated. I went to the pub with Roger a couple of times, but my situation was never referred to, and I don't think he ever knew what was going on. My nascent friendship with the fellow writer soon stuttered and came to an end. I could see her growing in confidence. And then he's referring to the woman that he was friendly with there. I could see her growing in confidence and more able to accept the idea of being a poet, but she didn't try to connect with me again after the first couple of days. On the final day, I wheeled my bike out and shook hands with Roger. God bless you, he said, clasping both his palms over mine, and I wondered what on earth he meant. The driveway back to the road was too steep to cycle, and I had to push the bicycle all the way to the top. About halfway up, I felt an anger entering my body, which turned rapidly into outright fury as I stopped for a moment to take in the scene, deciding at that precise moment to eject all poetry from my life. It would be a passage of 19 years before I returned to writing. And I think the unsaid part here is what's important, right? Like in the previous, like the listener writing in here talking about how there was this kind of like just weird atmosphere, right? Like kind of a guarded atmosphere with all these kind of middle-aged women, a scattering of writers his own age, reading a poem that perhaps, especially, I make this point all the time. If you're a male, if you're a straight male, this is important here. People think I say this because, it's some bitter thing or some anger that's coming up from within. No, this is just me being honest and talking about the reality of the world and the culture right now. Because if you're a straight male, there are certain rules. If you're a gay male, there are certain rules. And maybe that's always been the case. I'm not old enough to understand stuff pre kind of, 1990s era. I could just read about it. I wasn't there. And what I mean by that is in terms of, like gay male sexuality having to be hidden or closeted, as they say. But there is rules here. If you're a straight male and you write something that is sexual, lustful, anything that has to do with straight male sexuality, that's considered a violation of norms in the current culture. And obviously this was brewing way back in the 70s and 80s into the 90s, all across the globe, in the UK and the United States, all of that. So, and when you do that, and this still happens in workshops today, and I know many of you probably have experienced this, if you write something from a straight male perspective, it will be not just torn apart in the workshop by teacher and students alike, it will be seen as a mark against you, and you will be increasingly isolated from everybody else in the group. Any type of joke you make will be treated with extra scrutiny. It won't be a joke, right, at like a party where everybody's drinking. It will be considered some indictment on your personality, some indictment on you, and it is rather isolating. Now, and I mean, I know there's like different personalities, and some people can deal with that better than others. I always dealt with it pretty well, I think. I'm kind of an outgoing person. I like to talk to people, and I can usually talk to almost anybody. But I think that's what this listener was getting at here, is that there was the kind of an unsaid thing that happened after they read their poem out loud in this workshop. And it just leads to all this stuff that clouds out talking about art. It's what allows all of the kind of political ideas to come in and spoil a workshop or an institution. It's not treated with the same kind of anything goes attitude, right? It's treated with this political framework that allows people to find a reason to dislike you or to exclude you, or I mean, this is what literally is going on right now, right? In all the major publishing houses, in all of literary culture, there is a political excuse to not talk about the art, but about something else. And I always say this happens not on purpose. This happens because it's easier to do that than it is to talk about good art, especially great art. The educational institutions are not preparing people for that. They don't know how to talk about art and except in this kind of political way, using these political frameworks and claiming, something about feminism or oppression or something like that. What the work isn't doing as opposed to what it is doing is the favored kind of phrase when that comes up. And it's true. That's what it's all about. But I think this gets at something that's what makes it so frustrating, I think, for a lot of writers, is that it is always unsaid. Nobody says anything to you. Nobody talks about the art. they just kind of do this kind of social isolation thing. And it can ruin a lot of writers. Like this listener wrote in here, it took them almost 20 years before they tried writing again because it was so kind of off-putting to them. But I don't know, maybe some of you can write in about that, about what you feel. Not only has that happened to you, but like what you feel is kind of, has anything prevented you from trying to write? And I know there's all the usual stuff, the self-doubt and especially when you're starting out and stuff like that, that's all normal. But I think there are things other than that, especially when you call it this kind of, this new political world we live in, politically obsessed world we live in, I should say, where I think, I don't know, it can lead a lot of good writers to quit. I don't know, maybe write in if you have that. I think that'd be interesting. If you regular listeners will know, this podcast is kind of expanding beyond kind of the initial plan where I was just trying to focus on writing and books. It's expanding. I'm having like a filmmaker come on. I'm having musicians come on and things like that. Just artists in general. And talk about culture, talk about their projects and themselves and all of that stuff. And as I said, I've always wanted this to be a space where we can talk about these things honestly without fear of repercussions or something like that. And of course, there's some guests I've had on who don't want to talk about those things, but and I don't push them to do that. But yeah, let me know. Again, send me an email, heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. I will be like, okay, let's take a listen. I'll even have you on if you want to come on and talk about it. But yeah, and I see this all the time. I see this kind of stuff all the time. I just think to myself, like, man, what a waste, Again, today I'm recording this in lieu of recording an episode. I was very irritated. I got stood up by a writer today. No email, no call, no nothing. And it makes me furious when that happens about wasting my time. And I'm just like, wow, like, have a little courtesy. And I think this just goes to show, like, the writers are very thin-skinned. There's this, I think people lie about this too, where there's this like, oh, I didn't want all this fame. I didn't want to be a writer for a living. I just wanted to do something. And I'm like, yeah, bullshit. Like, I'm so tired of people lying to make themselves feel better. I'm so tired of people lying about the culture at large, why most of the books. This is something I'll say here. Maybe some writing about this, listeners, if you think this or you've seen this. This obsession with diversity in the literary canon right now. We don't have enough of it, so that because of that, there's this obsession with translations. So bringing things that aren't Western or aren't American literature into the conversation, like translating them, and I'm just like, that's such pathetic. It's so pathetic. One, those books are so mediocre. Most of them are incredibly mediocre. There's a reason they were never translated into English before. It's because they're mediocre books. Good books get translated into English, okay? And we read them and celebrate them here. Bolaño was translated into English, okay? Because they're better books. And I'm reading Bolaño right now. I'm reading 2666. Not crazy about it so far, but I'm only, like 270 pages in. It's like an 800-page book. So I'm just going to keep going, and I'll keep you guys updated on that. I know I haven't done any updates on my reading logs and stuff like that. I will continue to do that. I just didn't have time, basically the second half of last year. But I will do that as well this year. I will start to update you guys on my reading logs outside of the podcast. Give you my thoughts and stuff like that. And maybe I'll write some stuff up on it and put it on the Substack. We'll see. But yeah, all right. So that covers that. Again, if you have a story like this or you want to share something with me, thoughts, ideas, stuff about workshops or the culture at large or the academic institutions or things like the Poetry Foundation, yeah, please write in. I'm very open to it. I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys. Heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. But all right, this has been another episode of Heavy Board Presents JerkShop. See ya.
Heavy
Board.
heavy
I am heavy
Board.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Dinner.
resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources. American resources.
Being bored?
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom,
Heavy.
I should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, JerkShop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.